The world trembled on that fateful October day in 1962 when a Soviet submarine captain made the decision that would forever alter the course of human history. In the depths of the Caribbean Sea, surrounded by American destroyers and running out of air, he gave the order that would ignite Armageddon. The Cold War was about to turn hot, and humanity would never be the same. Let us venture into this dark alternative timeline, where the delicate balance of mutually assured destruction finally tipped toward catastrophe. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, became the flashpoint that many had feared since the dawn of the nuclear age. But before we witness the world burn, we must understand how close we truly came to this nightmare in our own reality. The crisis began when American reconnaissance planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida's shores. President Kennedy demanded their removal, implementing a naval quarantine of Cuba while the world held its breath. Soviet ships approached the American blockade, carrying more missiles and nuclear warheads. In our timeline, reason prevailed. But in this alternate history, aboard the Soviet submarine B-59, Captain Valentin Savitsky made a different choice. Deep beneath the Caribbean waves, his submarine was running out of air, its radio silent, surrounded by American destroyers dropping depth charges. In our world, his second-in-command convinced him to surface peacefully. But here, in this darker timeline, Savitsky believed World War III had already begun. He gave the order to launch their nuclear torpedo at the USS Randolph carrier group. The explosion illuminated the Caribbean Sea like a second sun. The American response was swift and devastating. Within hours, Strategic Air Command bombers were airborne, carrying their deadly nuclear payload toward Soviet targets. Soviet early warning systems detected the approaching aircraft, and Premier Khrushchev ordered an immediate counter-strike. The missiles rose from their silos in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Siberia, their contrails drawing white lines across the October sky. In Moscow, schoolteacher Elena Petrova was conducting her morning class when air raid sirens began their mournful wail. Through the classroom windows, she watched contrails streak across the sky, both incoming American missiles and outgoing Soviet responses. She gathered her students into the basement shelter, their small hands trembling in hers as the first detonations illuminated the city brighter than noon. Meanwhile, in Montana, missile silo operator Lieutenant James Carter received the unthinkable order. His hand shook as he turned the launch key, knowing his actions would condemn millions to death. The Minuteman missiles under his command burst from their underground chambers, joining the apocalyptic ballet already in progress. He thought of his family in Chicago, knowing he would never see them again. In divided Berlin, the Schneider family heard the air raid sirens and joined the desperate crowd rushing into the U-Bahn stations converted to fallout shelters. Karl Schneider held his wife and children close as the ground shook with each impact above. The Iron Curtain was being drawn aside by nuclear fire, reuniting East and West in mutual destruction. Chinese diplomat Liu Chen was in an emergency meeting in Beijing when news arrived of the nuclear exchanges between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. China's leadership had mere minutes to decide their response as reports confirmed the destruction of Soviet and American cities. Before they could reach a decision, the first missiles struck Beijing. The ancient city disappeared in a flash of atomic fire. Above it all, aboard the International Space Station, American astronaut Sarah Mitchell watched in horror as bright flashes bloomed across the Earth's surface. The blue marble she had marveled at just hours before was being transformed by human madness. Through her radio, she heard the final transmissions from ground control before silence engulfed the airwaves. Within the first hour, every major city in the United States and Soviet Union was either destroyed or severely damaged. The chain reaction spread across the globe as military allies honored their treaties, launching their own nuclear arsenals. NATO bases across Europe were vaporized. Soviet installations throughout the Warsaw Pact became craters. The carefully maintained balance of power collapsed into chaos. Secondary strikes targeted military installations, command centers, and industrial capabilities. Nuclear submarines, their communication with command severed, executed their final orders. Missiles rose from the depths of the oceans, seeking out any targets that might have survived the initial exchange. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction proved terrifyingly effective. As the immediate effects of the nuclear exchange became clear, the world's political structure disintegrated. In surviving government bunkers, military commanders seized control from civilian authorities. Democratic institutions crumbled as martial law became the only means of maintaining order. The maps drawn by centuries of diplomacy were erased in nuclear fire, replaced by zones of devastation and contamination. The environmental impact was immediate and catastrophic. Massive fires from burning cities pumped millions of tons of smoke and soot into the atmosphere. Within weeks, a nuclear winter began to take hold. Global temperatures plummeted as the sun's rays were blocked by the thick shroud of nuclear debris. Agriculture failed across the northern hemisphere, then worldwide. Survivors emerged from their shelters to find a world forever changed. The infrastructure that had supported modern civilization was gone. Electric grids failed. Communication networks went silent. Transportation systems ground to a halt. The global economy, already shattered by the destruction of major financial centers, collapsed entirely. Radiation spread on the winds, poisoning vast swaths of territory. Cancer rates skyrocketed among survivors. Birth defects became commonplace. The medical systems that might have offered treatment were overwhelmed or destroyed. Hospitals became morgues, then were abandoned as their staff succumbed to radiation sickness or fled. In the southern hemisphere, nations initially spared from direct nuclear strikes faced their own catastrophes. The nuclear winter caused crop failures and massive food shortages. Refugees from the north overwhelmed borders. Governments collapsed under the strain of maintaining order in a world where the basic structures of civilization had been abolished in less than 2 hours. The war itself lasted just 90 minutes, but its effects would persist for centuries. More than 2 billion people died in the initial exchange and its immediate aftermath. Billions more would perish in the following months from radiation, starvation, and the complete collapse of medical and social services. The survivors faced a world poisoned by radiation, plagued by violent storms, and trapped in an artificial winter that would last for years. The grand ideologies that had divided the world, capitalism and communism, democracy and authoritarianism, meant nothing in the face of basic survival. Former enemies became reluctant allies in the struggle to preserve what remained of human knowledge and civilization. Underground bunkers designed to shelter government officials became the seeds of new communities. The astronauts aboard the International Space Station became unwilling observers of humanity's near extinction. Their supplies dwindled as they watched the Earth transform below them, its blue oceans and white clouds obscured by the dark shroud of nuclear winter. Their final transmissions, picked up by surviving radio operators, described a planet they barely recognized. 5 years after the war, the nuclear winter began to lift, revealing a transformed world. The geography of power had been completely redrawn. Small, isolated communities of survivors had formed new societies, many reverting to pre-industrial technologies. The knowledge and achievements of centuries of human progress were preserved only in scattered bunkers and isolated research stations. The great cities that had defined human civilization lay in ruins, many too radioactive to approach. Nature began to reclaim the abandoned urban spaces. Forests grew in the streets of New York. Bears roamed the destroyed suburbs of Moscow. The world's population had been reduced to pre-industrial levels, scattered across the habitable zones that remained. 10 years after the war, the first attempts at rebuilding larger-scale societies began. Surviving technical knowledge became a precious commodity. Engineers who could restore power systems or repair communications equipment were treated like wizards. Libraries became temples, preserving the knowledge of the lost world. The few functioning satellites still in orbit became crucial links between surviving communities. The Internet, largely destroyed in the war, was gradually rebuilt as a shadow of its former self. Through these tenuous connections, survivors began to piece together the full scope of what had happened on that October day when one submarine captain's decision changed everything. 20 years later, the Earth still bore the scars of those 90 minutes of madness. Vast areas remained uninhabitable due to radiation. The global climate, though no longer in the grip of nuclear winter, had been permanently altered. New weather patterns emerged, creating deserts where farmland once flourished, and turning former wastelands into rare, arable territory. The human population, finally stabilizing after decades of decline, was a fraction of its pre-war numbers. The survivors had developed new societies, new beliefs, and new ways of living in their changed world. The war became a distant memory, then a legend, then a cautionary tale told to children about the dangers of human pride and the fragility of civilization. The question that haunts this alternative timeline is not who won the war. There were no winners, but how humanity could have allowed itself to come so close to this abyss in our own reality. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed us the precipice, but we stepped back. In this darker world, we stepped forward, and the consequences echo through generations. As we look back at this alternative history, we must remember how close we came to this reality. The Cold War may be over in our timeline, but nuclear weapons still exist, and the knowledge to create them cannot be unknown. The decision of one submarine captain could have ended our civilization in 90 minutes of fire and fury. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this alternative history is not how different it is from our world, but how easily our world could have become this nightmare. In the end, there was no victory to declare, no peace treaty to sign, no winner's justice to impose. The war ended because there was no one left to fight it, no governments left to surrender, no armies left to lay down their arms. The Cold War had turned hot, and in doing so, it had nearly extinguished the flame of human civilization. This is a story of how the world ended, not with a whimper, but with the thunder of 10,000 suns.